Every morning for 72 years, a man in Detroit, Michigan sat down with his first cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and hummed 3 bars of the same song his mother used to sing before he could remember her face. He didn't know why. It had been happening since he was a child in the St. Vincent's Home for Boys, this melody that lived in him with no origin he could name. And every morning for 72 years, a man in Birmingham, Alabama sat down with his first cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and hummed the same 3 bars, the same melody, the same key. He also did not know where it came from. He also did not know his mother's face. He had never known he had a brother. The day those 2 men stood across from each other on the stage of Family Feud in a moment no one had planned, no one had coordinated, and no one had been told was coming. Steve Harvey looked at both of them and went so quiet that the only sound in the 300-seat studio was the hum of the lights. He stood there for 40 seconds without speaking. When he finally found words, what he said left every person in that room silent for a reason they would spend years trying to explain. It was October 2021, and Edward Simmons had come to Atlanta from Detroit with his daughter Vanessa, his son-in-law Patrick, his granddaughter Brianna, and his neighbor Walt, who was his oldest friend and who had helped him practice Family Feud questions for 6 weeks in his living room. Edward was 72 years old. He was a retired postal worker. He had lived in the same house on Fenkell Avenue in Detroit for 41 years. He had raised 4 children. He had 11 grandchildren. He was, by any standard that matters, a full and complete man with a full and complete life. He was also a man who had spent 72 years carrying a question he had no way to answer. Who was he, really, before the foster system gave him his name? Edward had been placed in the St. Vincent's Home for Boys in Detroit in 1950, when he was 3 months old. The intake record, which he had finally obtained in 1998 through a Freedom of Information request that took 4 years to process, listed his birth date and the name of the hospital where he was born. It listed his birth mother's first name, which was Clara. It did not list a father. It did not list any siblings. Edward had searched for Clara for 11 years, from 1998 until 2009, when a genealogy researcher told him that a woman matching the description, same birth year, same county in Alabama, had died in 1973. He had stood in his kitchen in Detroit and held the phone and thought, "She died 25 years before I found her. She never knew I was looking." He had stopped searching after that, not because he gave up. Because grief, when it is old enough, sometimes asks to be set down. He had set it down. He had his children. He had Walt. He had his coffee every morning, and his 3 bars of a melody he still could not name. On the other side of the stage, Robert Clay had come to Atlanta from Birmingham with his daughter Sheila, his son Marcus, his grandson Deshaun, and his wife of 47 years, Evelyn. Robert was also 72 years old. He was a retired school principal. He had lived in Birmingham his whole life. He had 3 children and 9 grandchildren. He had served on the board of his church for 22 years. He was also a man born in Birmingham, Alabama, in 1949, in the same hospital as Edward Simmons. Robert had been adopted at 4 months old by the Clay family of Birmingham. Good people, loving people, the only family he had ever known or needed. He knew he was adopted. He had always known. His adoptive mother Iris had told him when he was 7 in the gentle, age-appropriate way that the best parents told those things. Robert had accepted it with the equanimity of a child who had never felt anything was missing, because the Clays had made sure nothing felt missing. He had not searched for his birth parents. He had not needed to. His was not a story of longing, but of completeness, and that was its own kind of beauty. He had never known he had a brother. He also hummed 3 bars of a melody every morning with his coffee. Black, no sugar. He had been doing it since he could remember. His wife Evelyn had asked him about it once, maybe 30 years ago, and he'd said he didn't know where it came from. It had just always been there, like breathing. But nobody in that studio knew that the two men standing across from each other on that stage were, in a way that no genealogy test had confirmed and no producer had planned, carrying the same 3 bars of the same song from the same woman neither of them had ever known. The producer of that episode, in an interview given 2 years later, said she had noticed it during the pre-show green room footage review, both men humming, briefly, separately, in rooms 30 feet apart. She had not recognized what she was seeing. She had noted it as a charming coincidence and moved on. She would spend a long time thinking about that decision. The game had been running for 9 minutes when a routine survey question, name something a parent leaves behind for their children, produced answers from both teams that paused the room. Edward's daughter Vanessa said a song they used to sing, and Robert's daughter Sheila said, almost simultaneously, a melody they always hummed. The room felt the coincidence before anyone articulated it. Steve Harvey looked at both families. He looked at Edward. He looked at Robert. "Gentlemen," he said slowly, "tell me about that." It was Edward who spoke first. He said his melody, 3 bars, no words, something he'd carried since the home. He described it. He hummed it. 3 quiet bars. The studio went still, because Robert Clay, across the stage, had gone very white. He hummed it back. The same 3 bars. The same key. Steve Harvey stopped moving entirely. "Where were you born?" Steve said to Edward. "Detroit," Edward said. "But the record says I was born at Jefferson Davis Hospital in Birmingham, Alabama, 1949. Robert Clay sat down in his chair. He sat down because his legs had stopped working. "Jefferson Davis Hospital," he said. Birmingham, 1949. The studio fell completely silent. 300 people. Not a sound. Not the usual game show pause. A different kind of silence entirely. The kind that happens when reality has done something that fiction would not dare attempt. Steve Harvey stood between the two men for 40 seconds without speaking. 40 seconds is a very long time on live television. Nobody moved. Nobody prompted him. A camera operator later said she simply forgot she was operating a camera. When Steve finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. It was not the television voice. It was not the entertainer voice. It was the voice of a man in the presence of something he cannot explain and is not going to try. "I don't know what I'm witnessing right now," he said. "I don't have words for what I think I'm witnessing. But I know this. These two men who have never met, who drove here from 2 different cities, who have lived their entire lives separately. These 2 men have been humming the same song every morning of their lives. And they were born in the same hospital, in the same year." He paused. He pressed his handkerchief to his face. "I've hosted this show for 12 years. In 12 years, I have never stopped a game because something happened that was bigger than the game. I am stopping the game." He looked at Edward and Robert directly. "We are going to find out," he said. "Right now. Tonight. Before anyone goes home. We're going to find out." He pulled out his phone. He called his genealogy team, the same team he'd used for an earlier special, and told them he needed an emergency DINA consultation that night in Atlanta for 2 men who needed to know something that could not wait. He wasn't done. He arranged accommodations at a hotel in Atlanta for both families that night, extended as needed, and told both families on the air that whatever the test revealed, neither family was paying for dinner or a hotel room for as long as they needed to be in Atlanta. The show, he said, was covering it. No network approval. This was Steve Harvey. A producer visibly panicked at the edge of the stage. Steve held up one hand without looking at her. That same night, in a conference room at the hotel, a geneticist ran an initial cheek swab panel on both men. The results, which took 72 hours to complete, confirmed what the 3 bars of a song had already suggested. Edward Simmons and Robert Clay shared 99.97% of their DNA. They were identical twins. Their mother's name was Clara. She had been 17 when they were born. She had held them both. She had sung to them. And then, because she was 17 and alone, and it was 1949 in Birmingham, Alabama, she had given them to the state. 2 babies, placed separately, sent in different directions. She had died in 1973 at the age of 41, never knowing either of them had found their lives. The episode aired 10 weeks after the taping, with a special follow-up segment documenting the DNA results. The clip of Steve Harvey standing between the 2 men during those 40 seconds of silence, before any words, was viewed over 280 million times in the first month. The hashtag #SameSong trended globally. It was covered by every major television network, every major newspaper, and hundreds of international outlets. The New York Times ran a feature. The BBC ran a documentary segment. 3 months after that day, Edward Simmons and Robert Clay spent their first Thanksgiving together. Both families. Detroit and Birmingham in the same house. 24 people, 2 tables pushed together. Children who had been strangers the month before running through the same yard. Edward's granddaughter Brianna and Robert's grandson Deshaun discovered they had both won their school science fairs with projects on birds. A year after the taping, the Clara Foundation was established, named after the mother neither of them had known, dedicated to supporting adoptees seeking birth family information and funding DNA testing for individuals who could not afford it. Its motto came from what Edward said backstage after learning the results. She sang to us both. "We just didn't know we were listening together." In its first year, the foundation helped reconnect over 1,200 adoptees with biological family members across the country. Today, Edward Simmons and Robert Clay call each other every morning. Before coffee, before the melody, they call each other first, and then they drink their coffee together on the phone. Black, no sugar, both of them. And sometimes one of them hums 3 bars, and the other joins in, and they don't need to say anything else. Steve Harvey, in a later interview, said this: "In 12 years of hosting Family Feud, I have witnessed things that I cannot explain. But that day, those 2 men, that song, that was the day I understood that some things are not coincidence. Some things are just waiting to be found." Their mother sang that to them, and then she let them go. And somehow, they both carried it. For 72 years. Until they found each other. He was quiet for a moment. I think she knew they would. There are connections in this world that run so deep that 72 years cannot interrupt them. That distance cannot dissolve them. That death cannot fully silence them. Clara sang to 2 babies in Birmingham in 1949, and the melody traveled through 2 foster homes, through 2 different cities, through 2 completely separate lives, and it arrived, intact, on a game show stage in Atlanta in 2021. Some songs last longer than the voice that sang them. If this extraordinary story of 2 brothers and the song they never knew they shared moved you, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. Share this with someone who believes it is never too late to find your family. Have you ever discovered a connection to someone that defied explanation? Share your story in the comments below. Because as Edward and Robert proved, and as Clara seemed to know before any of us, love does not have an expiration date.